My particular trauma in this instance was as a young girl being sexually abused by my uncle. Would I have been able to say that back in the day? I believe I would, but I didn't really know what that did. That was it. I didn't know what that did. The only way that I could feel that emotion was to think of 7-year-old Yemi or think of another girl or boy outside of me, and it would take me to bits. I couldn't even give myself that amount of self-love or empathy. I had to think of somebody else.
You're listening to the Woman of Value podcast. You are about to hear the story of a woman who is following her dreams and passions and creating positive change in the world. My guest today is Yemi Penn. She is an author, a documentary producer, a speaker, an engineer, and a fearless thought leader. She is the author of Did You Get the Memo? Because I effing didn't. And she is a serial entrepreneur and has businesses in Sydney, Australia, London, and the United States. She is working tirelessly to raise awareness and heal our individual and collective trauma. And she invites us to use our trauma as a catalyst for transformation and growth. Welcome to the podcast, Yemi.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a repeat kind of lesson when I hear my bio being read back to me of, okay, Yemi, remember your mission. So an absolute honor to be given the platform to speak. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm really just inspired by your story, and I can't wait to have you share it with our audience. So let's start with what I always ask every single guest, which is, what does woman of value mean to you?
The first thing that comes to mind is self-worth. There's almost, and then I could go into more, but woman of value is how do you find yourself worthy? If there was a worthy scale, where does it sit? And does it come from yourself? Or are you still relying on some external measure? So woman of value is, where do you rate your self-worth? And what I haven't figured out yet is what the range is. Is there a range? Is it just a tick, yes, no, I am worthy, or I am worthy of this or that, or full stop, I am worthy? For me, woman of value is when you get to the point that you just say, I am worthy, and you are the one that kind of gives yourself that blessing.
I like that. Full stop. There definitely is a range. I never really thought of it that way, but I think that people can lose their sense of worth when it's coming from outside of ourselves. And that is such a danger, where we look to external sources for validation, for our value. And then when one of those things or people are taken away, we don't know our worth.
Correct. We're lost. Motherhood is a perfect example. You give so much, and I know that your audience will range, but you give so much, and then the kids either go away or something happens, and you just don't know who we are. So for me, woman of value is defining your self-worth almost every step of the way, whether you have kids, don't have kids, career, entrepreneur, just always do that check.
Yeah, and we're taught that our value lies within the things that we do, our accomplishments, if we get good grades, if we marry somebody who has status, if we wear the clothing that has status, like it's the money we earn, the things we do, and not who we are. And what I'm hearing you say is, you have inherent worth outside of all of that other stuff.
Absolutely. And you just read out the title of my book. What you just described as the memo. There's either a memo that we think we got, which says to do X, Y, Z, and if we don't have it, but it was never baselined. It was never, it never put our individual stories, our individual wants, our individual desires. So we literally need to change the memo and stop attaching our value to external things. If that's a message I could leave today, it would be that, and love the fact that this is the podcast you do to remind women and take them back to who they are.
Yeah, you mentioned also that our kids can leave, and who are we without our children? I have had the opposite problem. My kids are always coming back. You know, it's, I have my daughter's here from California now. She moved out there and now she's like, oh, I love it here. I never want to leave. And my son moved out and he's back every single day. So I guess that's a good thing, right? That
It
they
is.
want to be with their mom.
Yeah, that's what, and that, you know, I've got a teenager, and every now and again she says to me, "I really like you, mum. I really like it." And I'm like, okay,
Aw.
I'm doing something right. But our relationship is so flexible that I can say, okay, I need some downtime now. No more talking. Downtime.
Well, I love that too, because, you know, raising children, I think is the ultimate mirror for us, and to
Mm,
reevaluate who we are and what we want to impart in our children, because we are the leaders of our family in many ways,
yeah.
especially if there isn't a man who is a leader in the family. And I know you
Mm,
have a story about that.
yeah.
And we'd love to hear that too. But I think that I know for me, when I started having children, I started to really look at some of my stories and what had been passed down and what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to change. And I think
Yeah.
it's such an amazing opportunity for us to evaluate, what do we want to take with us? What do we want to impart into the next generation if we are moms?
I mean, you see, I wish they taught us that exercise you just described. I don't know, in school, at work, or something. Like, it just needs to be embedded in some sort of curriculum, which is, what do I want to hold on to? What's serving me well, and what do I want to pass on? I wrote my book fundamentally because I had this sort of irrational fear of dying before my time. And then I realized it wasn't really death I was worried about, because that's kind of like a guarantee. It was the fear of dying without telling my kids any version or side of a story from my perspective, from my words, not what anybody else was going to say or think Yemi used to do. And that's exactly what I did. I wrote in the book, and they kind of words to them. You know, I made sure they were at my book launch. But I just, the fact that you say it with such wisdom, and I'm like, can you go and tell everybody else to do that? Figure out what they want to hold on to and what they want to pass on. It's it's fundamentally another reason why I called my book that, because I feel so many women in particular, if we talk about matriarchy, who have so much wisdom, and I'm just not convinced. Well, we know that we never really had much of a voice for the past couple of centuries. Um, but we need to hear more. We need to hear the good, the bad, the ugly, the rough. Let's hear it so that we, other generations, can figure out what we want to take out of that and what we want to make better. But yeah. So you just got me so animated with that, because I just think we need it. We need
Yeah.
it.
Well, I love it. I love everything that you're sharing too. It's we don't realize we're a choice, you know, and I've shared this before, but my mother was such a she's still alive. She's 90. She just turned 90, and she talks about being a martyr a lot, like, you know, a victim, a martyr. And I once asked her, like, why do you think you have to martyr yourself like this? And she goes, well, I can't help it. I come from a long line of martyrs. My mother was a martyr. My grandmother was a martyr. And I said, yeah, mine was too, Mom. It's like, you got a choice. You don't have to keep passing down this legacy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's not simple. I'm not trying to diminish how difficult this can be, but we have to realize that we have choices, and that we
Yes.
have a choice to see our worth. We have a choice to proclaim our value in the world,
Mm.
and to inspire others to reach their potential.
Yeah, I do wonder though whether different generations felt differently. Like, I mean, we'll go into my story a bit later, but when I started doing the work on trauma and speaking about trauma, it was and still is the biggest taboo. I mean, Nigerian born, well, not British born, but living in Nigeria, West Africa, culturally, we don't talk about the problems. And so I'm actually really now fascinated in why certain parts or certain generations or certain individuals and generations really didn't want to upset the norm, didn't want to ruffle the feathers of status quo, even when it felt morally wrong and unjust. It just didn't feel right. I'm actually really intrigued as to why they just took it as is. Because when I speak to my mum now, and I never had the vocabulary to put it, when she would question why I was doing the work I was doing, I said, look, I get a little bit maybe why your generation just didn't do much and wanted to keep the peace, but I've got to be a peaceful activist for change. Like I cannot finish this life feeling like I didn't do something different for my daughter and my son. It's just how I feel, but I just don't get why there's any other generation that just accepted it. And once again, no blame, but just really interested. How do we progress without it? That's my question.
It's a great question, and I agree with you. I think that we are living in a very different time than our parents did. And
Yeah.
there's a lot more support for speaking up, for
Yes,
showing up,
exactly.
for being whoever you need to be in the world, even though there still is pushback and there's inequality and we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues, but we do have permission, I think, to feel and that's a big part of it too.
Yes.
Having
Yes.
emotions, being able to express feelings, even knowing how to express feelings about anything. And most of us still don't know how to do that. I mean, I teach
Yeah.
courses in communication and boundary setting because people don't know. They don't know even what values they're protecting by speaking up and setting a boundary. You know, it's a very different world we live in, and we still have a far way to come, definitely.
Yes, we do. We do. I mean, I love that you're teaching that as well. And I used to think, why would we teach that? Wouldn't we just know? But I know this. We don't just know, because we've got a whole set of belief systems that we have been given, taken probably through our DNA, and there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done.
Yeah,
So, no, great.
definitely unlearning. So let's hear your story. I would love to hear the pivotal moment, and there probably is more than one, but a pivotal moment where you began to really step into your value.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday, and something, because I like to be really honest. I'm very transparent. I kept on, what was the word? Chastising myself for saying, "Oh my gosh, Yemi, it took you so long to know your value." Like I really was, because I was looking at the time and thinking, you can't share that with everyone on there. But I'm a realist. I want to be a realist because I talk about the memo, and if I can be open, hopefully it'll give other people the space to feel safe to be open with them. And some people might think this was quite early, but I think I've only realized my value probably about 2-3 years ago. And for the purpose of age, which I think is nothing but a number, it was me in my mid to late 30s. So I'm 2 kids deep and a divorce, 2 kids with 2 different dads. When I could never say that before, because that for me was the height of shame. It was the height of shame. It wasn't what I was taught. I was taught get married, 2.4 kids, a dog, white picket fence. And here I was just completely obliterating that model. And I felt like I was paying for it. So, by all means, I'm more than happy to go into the pain and the suffering of that part. But my value, or understanding my value and my self-worth, only happened afterwards, when I probably effectively went to breaking point. I literally needed to move to the other side of the world, Australia, to just silence. I only was able to find my worth from the silence. And that silence only came because I took a risk. I literally did what probably most people thought was crazy. You don't move to a different side of the world not knowing that many people. It just wasn't the done deal. My son was 7 months old. My daughter was 7 years old. My then husband was in Japan, where I had left him from and come to Australia. But once again, I don't know, ancestors, a higher being. I just kind of got guided, just go to Australia. But I was evidently desperate. And that was when the work began, 2014. But really, it didn't start getting worse till I'd got into a relationship and realized that, okay, something's up with the way in which I view relationships, the way in which I receive love in relationships. And so I started to do the work, and whether that was therapy or listening to YouTube videos, and then it started to build and build, and it's taken time to cultivate. But probably as of 2 years ago, when I finally made the decision for my son to go spend some time with his dad in the US, and then this year for my daughter to go spend some time with her dad in the UK. And I've always had an open relationship for them to have with their kids. It's not that. But I was tying my worth to being the martyr. I really was. That just came from me as a download. I really was. And I realized that my value expands way more than that. Don't want to trivialize motherhood, but way more than that. I can give my kids so much love by expanding them into the village or giving them different experiences. And yes, there's been materialistic success with businesses, and that definitely had something to do with my worth, that I didn't need to rely on having a man, a husband, a stay-at-home father with the kids to feel like I was, I don't know, contributing to society. So that definitely gave me value. But the decision for my kids to still be nurtured and loved, not necessarily within the home I built, was a big aha moment for me.
So you felt that being in your mid to late 30s was late in life, which is funny to me.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, right. I think I was like 48 when I realized that I had choice and I had to leave my marriage and reclaim who I was, because I had lost myself in the process. So being in your mid to late 30s, even though it feels like late in life, is actually way before a lot of people start to wake up, and some never do.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about some of the stories. So there was the white picket fence story, and having an intact family with a husband, with the two kids, having the same parent maybe. And the other thing that you talked about was shame. And I know, I want to focus a little bit on the trauma that came before, but where did that shame come from when you talk about the shame?
It's a good question, and I'd really like Brene Brown to get on that and study a bit more.
I'll call her up.
Like, please do. Where did the shame come? This is what's really interesting, because really what I should be saying is the shame came from the fact that there were other people who appeared to have this perfect nuclear family. And to a certain extent there were, but that was the surface. And I can only say that now because I'm significantly more aware. And in me speaking, I get thousands of messages of people saying, Yemi, this is happening to me. I'm so glad you shared it, and you haven't done it without demonizing anyone. But the shame came from what I was perceiving to be perfect, whether it was on TV. And to be really fair, and I think you'll get this, truly do love and honor, and so grateful for my parents. But they definitely wanted me to follow the memo. They wanted me to do the white picket fence. And I remember when I had my daughter with her dad and things didn't work out literally a year in, my dad had said to somebody else who decided to gift me by telling me that he was worried no other man would want to be with me because I had a kid. And I don't believe my dad has passed. He's the gentlest of souls. We definitely had a soul bonding that I didn't take advantage of while he was alive. I actually think he was saying that because he was worried for me. He was worried that no other man would accept me with a child. And I think that was when the shame story began. Once again, another download. I've never put that in words before, which is why I'm always grateful for whoever's interviewing me, because you gift me that realization. But that would have been it, because my dad, this stoic, gentle giant, really thought that poor Yemi, she's not gonna get that nuclear family now. And that was where the shame started. Because I thought, if he thinks it, everybody else thinks it. And every time I go to a party and it's just me and my little girl, they're going to be wondering, where is he? Where is he? So it was a lot of cowering. I'd take my daughter to school, and there were these, complete families doing the drop-offs to school. I literally felt like I had leprosy. I mean, back in biblical times, you had leprosy like you were just an outcast, but I literally would drop my daughter and skedazzle like Usain Bolt out of the school complex, just so I didn't have to hold the shame that I didn't have a husband. So yeah, layers.
Wow. And I totally get that. I think that we can so easily adapt the story that we're told, or, the shame that somebody else feels, somebody that we respect and admire and love is worried about us. We can take that on as our story and our shame. And it's important to dismantle it, because when you realize the truth of it, that you are no less whole because you don't have that family that may be dysfunctional. We don't know what happens behind closed doors. And I see this, the compare and despair kind of thing that happens a lot with body shame, with, people who are single, who think that everybody's coupled, and especially around the holidays when we're taping this is when a lot of that stuff comes up too. I'm the only one and everybody else has a family. And I used to have this image that every family, like after I got married, that families used to sit around the table and everybody had such beautiful meals where nobody threw food and nobody was running around and screaming. And I went to a conference once and people were all talking about their dysfunctional family dinners. And I was like, oh God, I'm not alone. We don't know that until we really start to talk to other people and see what other people's stories are. And, there is, like you said, you're sharing some of your shame helps other people realize, oh, wait, I don't have to hold on to this, or I'm not alone. I also felt shame around not having the nuclear family and the white picket fence. So how did you begin to heal from the shame?
I used to say I ran away. And I don't know whether I don't say that anymore because there's still shame attached to it. But people definitely thought I was running away. I had some people say, you're going to have to deal with it. But the best way I did is I took myself out of the environment in which the shame kept on growing and moving around, and I'm the first girl from a cultural perspective. Everybody's looking for the first girl to make the right decision so that the other siblings can follow. And so I just needed a different space. When I do my coaching, I tell people change your environment. It doesn't need to be physical. I'm quite extreme. So mine was physical and I moved away. That was the beginning of my healing journey that I didn't think was, because it gave me space. It gave me space. I moved somewhere where culturally there weren't going to be that many people like me. And I needed to be open to a different perspective. I love my culture. I'm doing a PhD that involves, my culture. So I want to make that clear. But like you said earlier, I had to pick out the things that weren't working for me. Remember, there was an element of colonization where we didn't live this way anyway. So I'm having to go back and say, okay, well, what point did we sign up to this? And at what point is this doing more harm than good? So from being here and being around a different culture yet again, I found out that therapy doesn't mean I'm labeled crazy as per what we once again heard in the past. And that was mind-blowing. And I couldn't afford it at the time. So I went to students who were still learning to be psychologists. And my goodness, there's so much power in just talking. And that was the beginning of my healing, because I found that I actually do have a voice. I actually found that I can string some words together. And it opened up a lot there, because then I would go to personal development programs, but I'd only know about them because I would open up and tell that work colleague that I was a bit ashamed of being over here without a father. And then they'd say, yeah, my father and mother went through this, and oh, there's this event coming up, you should go. I think, speaking with less shame was the beginning of my healing.
So there's power in talking. There's definitely power in talking and finding out that you have a voice. There is so much power in that. And now you've been sharing your voice both on the stage and in your book and in all of your programs and your writing and, people that you work with, which is probably, I'm imagining that, but continuing to be open and share your voice probably is very healing. It's like an ongoing healing for you.
It is. It really, really is. And I underestimated it because, once again, speaking to you, I've had about 3 realizations that I've never coined together. And that's part of it. we just finished filming my third documentary 2 weeks ago. And one of the therapists had said that when you keep things in, it doesn't, like, the words are scrambled within you. But when you speak them out, you start to put them in words, like you start to sort it, which gives you this relief of this unsettlement, whether you have stomach ulcers or, I don't know, something stuck in your throat. That's literally what speaking allows you to do. And yeah, I think the more interviews I do, which I only decided to put my hand up for to do more, didn't even realize it would be a byproduct. It's doing exactly that. It's actually allowing me to clear my throat chakras, and it's awesome. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a treat for me too. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the documentaries about trauma, right? They're about trauma. Tell us what's going on with that, and where that came from in your own past, and what's your vision for these documentaries?
So when I wrote my book, I really think I also wrote my book because I wanted to speak about one particular traumatic incident that I recall, but borderline kept on haunting me, even though I was so sure I'd moved on. I mean, if I go back to that Yemi then, I had moved on. Life was going as it was, or so I thought. So when I wrote that book, and it's childhood trauma, when I had my book launches in London and in Sydney, everyone will come up to me, at least 1 in 3 people. Oh, you know that chapter on childhood trauma, what you went through, that happened to me, or it happened to my sister, or it happened to my mum. And it was the same thing again. Is everyone just waiting for somebody else to be bold enough to put it on some sort of platform? So the book was kind of like my teaser, my interview with Jack Canfield. It was exactly that. It was in that interview I realized that was my teaser. It was just to say, hey, this happened, and I actually want someone to hear me. And let's see what happens. And then my business manager said, I think you need to do a documentary on trauma. And my mind said, no, nobody wants a whinging girl talking about her trauma. Let's just keep it moving. And I was gifted a few readings, like based on my numbers, numerology. I'd only recently started like opening up to that. And the woman was really, what did she say? She said she felt like my ancestors were around her, saying that there's some work for me to do. And I just got the immediate download that it was trauma. Trust me, I did not want to do this work because I just knew my family would be like, enough already. And they were. Well, one particular family member sent me a message saying, Yemi, you wrote a book about this. Really, you're not going to do a documentary on it. And I did. The documentary is titled, the first one, Did I Choose My Trauma? Because when I was working with the producer, she said, typically when you do a documentary, it's to find something out, something really intriguing. But because I was speaking to so many people and a few people who were in different religions or sects or whatever, we're given this notion that we choose in some previous life to go through something so that we can transform and learn. And I had to call BS on it. I was like, no way, no way. But I'm also really open. And so I decided to call it, Did I Choose My Trauma? I want to know. On something, did I choose it? And my particular trauma in this instance was as a young girl being sexually abused by my uncle. Would I have been able to say that back in the day? I believe I would, but I didn't really know what that did. That was it. I didn't know what that did. The only way that I could feel that emotion was to think of 7-year-old Yemi, or think of another girl or boy outside of me, and it would take me to bits. I couldn't even give myself that amount of self-love or empathy. I had to think of somebody else. Doing the documentary was healing in itself. I had therapists, practitioners. We didn't just talk about that particular type of trauma, but just all types of trauma and how we keep things buried and how we can dissociate. And once again, never done a documentary. I literally Googled how to make a documentary, and it came together within 3 months. We've had over 100,000 downloads and review of it, and it's growing. Now done the third, because people want to know. They want to know. And it's not the sexiest topic in the world. It's something people really don't want to talk about, but needed. And especially with what's been going on in the past couple of years, we're going to need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's the work I do with trauma.
Being sexually abused, I can understand why your family would say, or somebody in your family would say, it's enough already. We don't want to talk about it anymore. And there's shame and all kinds of things that happen within families. There's denial. There's, I'm sure, you know, some people didn't believe you. And I also know how important it is to bring shame to light, because it can't exist in the light. And that's what Brene Brown would say if she was here.
You channeled her in, love it.
Right. We have to bring it out of the darkness in order to normalize it, in order to help people find themselves in your stories. And I think trauma is a hot topic now. I mean, the disassociation, I have seen it in my work as a dating and relationship coach. When you've had any kind of childhood trauma, and a lot of it is not as big as molestation or sexual abuse, it can be a small T trauma, which can be my family moved a lot and I had to keep changing schools, or there was a sick child in my family, or my parent had mental illness, or there's so many types of trauma that we tend to diminish because we were taught never to speak about our feelings and never to just deal with it, you know, just get those good grades and keep on going and just don't talk about it. And I remember when I first started doing this work as a coach, and my mother was telling me not to get nervous before a workshop I was presenting. It was my very first workshop. And I was over prepared. I mean, I was like overthinking it, over preparing for it, because I was scared. Because I was scared of putting myself out there and being seen and being heard. That was a big deal for me. And I said to her, I really appreciate that you want to support me, but when you tell me not to feel something, that does not help. Can I tell you what would work better? And that was like huge for me. And so she was like, okay. And I said, if you could just believe in me, that would be great. If you could say, Sandy, you got this, I believe in you, that would be amazing. So good. It was a training, because I had to learn after so many years of being quieted and told not to speak up and not to feel, that actually feeling nervous before something big is a natural feeling. And that's okay. It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. The disassociation happens when you can't deal with the trauma and you're so triggered by the trauma that you have to act differently, hide your feelings. I've seen people who are sad or angry and they're smiling when they talk about it. There's so many ways that we disassociate. So I'm wondering, you know, in what ways did it come out in your life when you had this trauma? Were you able to talk about it when you were young?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of reported my uncle maybe to my auntie, even my siblings, but a few of them only remembered when he resurfaced in a really triggering way in my 30s. I think I remember telling a grandmum, but it didn't feel like anything was done because he would just come back. And, there's one memory I have, but I know there were more. And as I grew older, I found myself, and once again, then it didn't make sense, but now I'm doing the work. Every now and again, there was someone I would tell, possibly all my relationships. Yeah, just even now thinking, it was just really, I mean, I want to find out, why did I tell every partner? Was I telling them so I was more available to be abused? Now, I don't think in any of my relationships I've been abused or overpowered. My self-worth and self-value was low, really low. I think sexually, 100% it's impacted me. Still need to do the work. I've only started to truly explore and be excited with, having sex with my current partner. And he's not the father of any of my children. So, there goes the story of the memo and the perfect house. So it definitely did a lot of things. And I think the other thing was my voice, because the way I saw it as a little girl, when I spoke and nothing was done, that silenced me. But the reason why it was more severe is that, and I don't think I put this in the book because I then start to venture into others, but it's in my TED talk. When I was 30, in my early 30s, so about 2012, this uncle comes back. Well, comes back, he comes from Nigeria or wherever he was to London. And I find out he's looking after my cousin, who happened to be the same age as my daughter at the time, 5 years old. What was quite interesting is that the alarm, I didn't realize my body had an alarm system. It was blowing off. It was blowing off with no other knowledge other than Uncle David is looking after X, Y, and Z. And you see, and that's what I mean. It's just, I mean, I didn't know my body had an alarm system, but I was ringing everybody, all my siblings. Never let Uncle David look after your kids. Never let Uncle David. So it's like, once again, I hadn't started this awakening spiritual, but it felt like someone was talking to me saying, this is why you speak. This is why we've got to speak, because the only way you can change things is by speaking. And in calling my auntie, I told her, I said, I don't know, maybe he's changed. You know, there was a bit of forgiveness in my voice. Maybe he's changed, but I just don't think it's a good idea. Sadly, I was too late. That doesn't appear in the documentary, but it will come up later on. I was too late because he had already abused his power again. And the message I was told, I got a phone call from a few elders, I would just say, who said, what do you want to achieve by speaking? I mean, I was told that when I was 7. And then I was told that again in my 30s. I probably had some sort of personality split. That's the reason why I moved to Japan. I moved to Japan because at that point I thought, F this, I am out. Like, I don't understand how I've just blown everything by calling people. We know it's happened again. And you are asking me what the benefit is in speaking. My brain could not compute. I dissociated and I decided to get married and move to Okinawa, Japan. So I would say that particular event manifested in a number of ways that trickled year after year after year.
And your body knows. Your body
Yes.
never lies. So your body was ringing all those alarms because there's this inner warrior, is that what we call it in our boundaries work, is we don't even know where this strength comes from sometimes, but it's like, I am here to defend somebody.
Yes.
I don't want this to ever happen again. And
Yes.
it's this incredible, it's like the same inner warrior that is able to lift a car off of somebody. Like if something happened to your child and you'd be like, lift the car off the child
You would,
with strength, right? That you never knew you had. And yeah, so I definitely understand, like if you've been suppressed and it has to come out, it's going to come out in some way. And just to psychoanalyze you for a minute, if I may.
Please.
First of all, it shows me great survival skills where you were trying to survive. And so you moved away from what was hurtful and what was harmful to reinvent yourself. And you've done this more than once, right?
Yeah.
So, and we get to a point in our lives where survival is not enough. And that sounds like that's where you are now. It's like when you go from surviving to thriving, it's no longer okay to just keep running to the next place to get away from what wasn't working, but to actually stay where you are and make it work, and do what you need to make it work.
Yes. And it continues. It really does continue, because I still move even within Australia. Now, I think there is a nomadic spirit in me, to be fair, but I do have to check myself before I'm about to plod along to the next place of, are you running from something, Yemi? Yeah, and the reason why the work I do on trauma, I'm so attached to it is because whatever we do not resolve, we hand down to our children. And that came up front and center early 2020 with my teenager. She was going through something traumatic, but I was responding to her trauma partly the way I responded to mine. Like, you think it's the same thing. That is intergenerational trauma. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing. It's just your coping mechanism. And if you are the main primary carer, you add it on in one way or another. And if I like moving a lot and she wants stability, shoot, then we've got to work it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I also am fairly nomadic, and I moved, I think, 12 times in my life. And when I got divorced, I was like, okay, where next? And then I realized I've got kids. Hey, wait a minute. My actions affect them. So yeah, I was ready to pick up and go anywhere. And I love to travel, and I love new experiences, but it's always important to self-reflect. Am I running away from something or towards something?
Yes. Oh, I love your work. I love your work. It was brilliant questions. And that's what we need to do. I mean, no knowledge is new knowledge, but I heard this from Tony Robbins, which is the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life. And if we can do that internal reflection, there's a lot of self-healing we can do. So yeah.
That's true. I wanted to also just address why you were sharing your trauma. And in my experience, we tend to trauma bond when we haven't yet healed our trauma. And so we bond with people based on our wounds rather than from our higher self. And I definitely was guilty of this as well. You're defined by your trauma until you realize this does not define me. There's a lot of other parts of me that just haven't been realized yet. And so the trauma, because it was unhealed, becomes the way you bond. And that's what leads to us bonding to unhealthy partners.
So I only found out about trauma bonding when I was doing my filming. And one of the ladies who shared her story of sexual abuse as a child says that it then became attached to domestic violence. And then the deeper trauma bonding was that when he would apologize and give her flowers the next day, she was attached to the flowers and the joy she would get after that traumatic, violence. And isn't that knowledge in itself freeing? Wouldn't it be freeing for people to just be aware that, so even though I think all men or all women or all people are just X, Y, Z, it could be that my unhealed trauma has just got me attracting people who are just as wounded and unhealed as I am. And it's a tough pill to swallow, because it means you got to take responsibility.
Ouch. I have to be an adult.
Right? But we've got to, my next documentary series is titled Cleaning Our Trauma. We've got to start cleaning it and learning every day. You've given me some things to think about here as well that I wouldn't have thought of before, but just be open to that. It's so much sweeter on the other side.
Absolutely. And I hear from so many people, every person I meet cheats on me, or every person I meet is a scammer. And I'm like, that doesn't happen to everybody. It really doesn't happen to everybody. And so there are other things at play. And if we don't take responsibility for what we're putting out there, the vibrations we're putting out, what we tolerate, what we let people do to us, when we have healed a lot of our past trauma. And I'm not saying that we have to have it all healed to be in a healthy relationship. Absolutely not. We heal in relationship. And so we can start our healing outside of the relationship, but the only way we can really have whole healing is to be in relationship with somebody who holds a safe space for us to continue healing each other.
I believe I've found that now. I truly do. Although, as we were talking, I thought, did we originally meet through trauma bonding? But it's got to be okay to ask those questions. But when I look at the growth of both of us, when I look at, you know, transcendental meditation we go to together, we didn't even know how to say the word transcendental a couple of years ago, and then all of a sudden we're in there mantraing it out. So and the growth is good, but I love that bit. I mean, that needs to be a highlight. Is someone who can create the safe place, although there might not be perfect, but the safe place, and also just the nourishment and environment for you to both grow either on your own or together.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be the end. Like you can both grow until you don't grow anymore. And it may be time to find someone else who's part of your journey. I think people think they have to, right, to get to the end of the road and this is it. And everything is going to be about this person. But I think when you have a more open idea about relationships and you can realize that everybody's part of the journey, every good relationship, every unhealthy relationship, they're all part of it. Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking, where did this woman come from? I love her. Can she just be like, you know, and I'm laughing because another reason why I'm laughing is because I tell my partner that, but he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't. I'm like, babe, let's just enjoy the road. Let's just see how we go. You know, I listen to Abraham Hicks, people who know will know. And she suggests relationship like being on a cruise line, like a cruise ship. You go on, you spend 7 days and you're about to get off and there's a form. Would you like to stay for another 7 days? And just tick it. That sits well with my soul. That says I'm just going to enjoy it as it is. But it's not something that most people can take. So I just laugh because I'd like you to speak to my partner.
I'm happy to speak to him. Well, relationships are a choice. And I think that we don't always think are a choice. We often feel imprisoned. We feel like we're not a choice. And, you know, so much of this conversation today is about choice. We choose how we deal with our trauma. We choose how we are in relationship. We choose what we do about the past, the stuff that's passed on to us, and how we can either take it with us or change it and transform it transform it for the next generation and break a legacy if there's a legacy of abuse or a legacy of quieting and stifling and tamping down instead of raising up.
Yes, agreed. All of that. And I think we're doing it. I think generations before are going to see something different. And the more we speak and the more we continue to create safe containers through the collective, the quicker we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned a future documentary. Tell us a little bit about what is up for you for the future.
Ooh. So I'm doing a PhD. I think I was guided to do a PhD 2 years ago, but I was like, nah, don't want to study anymore. And I made the first documentary, but it's come back. And as I continue to do the work, I think I kind of got this nudge of, well, what's 3.5 years when you're going to be doing this for a lifetime? I was like, okay, fair point. So I'm currently doing a PhD, which is looking at, can trauma be transformative, and looking at specific, African and 1 or 2 other indigenous cultures, what role they play in helping us resolve trauma. So I'm really excited about that. That will probably see me obviously do a lot of research, do some conferences, and also do documentary. So I've got the buzz for the creative arts. I'm loving telling stories in a non-threatening, but really thought-provoking and beautifully triggering way that gets people to go and look at their trauma. So that's what this series is. The documentary series of Cleaning Our Trauma is about everybody looking at their own, other people telling their stories. And, you know, the vision is to get that on some of our local channels here, but take it to Netflix, do a feature length. But the real vision, which, you know, I'd like to put a 5-year mark on it, is with my partner opening up these retreats, which will be called Sawubona healing retreats. And Sawubona in Zulu means I see you, because I believe a lot of us just want to be seen. But these retreats where people can leave their lives, and the reason why I hesitated there is that I think we need to change the way we live now anyway. But for a minimum, until we get to that place, people can come to these retreats and just be seen. It doesn't have to just be about trauma, although the statistics show every other person has definitely experienced something, whether it's big T or small t. But they can come to these retreats and just be seen and have access to a range of services that that renew them and remind them of who they are. So that's the big goal. But for now, documentaries, PhD, speaking, that's going to be my bag.
Beautiful vision, all connected.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Susan Davis, the psychologist?
No.
She talks about this in her TED Talk. It's she wrote a book called Emotional Agility, and she talks about being seen. She's from South Africa. And so how do you spell the to be seen in African?
SAWUBONA. Sawubona, yeah.
Got it.
And her name is Susan Davis, you said?
Susan Davis, yeah. She's just wonderful. She's like this incredible soul. I would love for you to find out more about her. I think you'll connect. All right, we're going to go into the lightning round now. Yemi, Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go. Drink some water quickly.
Let us go. I used to think I wasn't blank enough.
Strong enough. Mentally strong. Mm-hmm.
What was the number one thing holding you back from becoming a woman of value?
Myself.
Isn't it always? What is the best advice you can give to a woman who wants to become more empowered?
If not you, then who?
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Somebody else said this, but I definitely want to take it. You're guaranteed to miss the shot you don't take. So take it.
I think Michael Jordan.
Okay, yeah. That would make sense.
But it's a great quote, and we often don't take them. And, this is very much like everything that you're sharing today. It's step up, do it. You're qualified to do it. Just do it.
Absolutely.
What is something that people often get wrong about you?
They think I'm an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I just want to stay home. I really do. I'm actually I'm very lovely. I'm very kind. I will meet you anywhere, but I'm borderline antisocial.
I totally hear you. I'm an introvert too. Most of the people in my life are introverts. And finally, Yemi, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, I'd like to be remembered as the woman who encouraged people to contribute and give as a result of their traumatic events. That's a mouthful. I've never thought about that, but I want to be remembered for people almost healing their trauma through contribution.
Wow, this has been an inspiring conversation, Yemi. I can't wait to share it with everyone. And if you can share how people can find you, I have a bunch of links to your Facebook and your LinkedIn, your Instagram. What's the best link that people can find you at?
Instagram is probably the best because it's where I am my most open and say how I feel, and I'd love for you to connect with all of me. So that's just yemi.penn. But if not, my website usually has updates, which is yemipenn.com.
Well, thank you so much for being a beautiful representation of a woman who has stepped into her value and is really creating incredible change in the world. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you for inviting me.
If you would like to step more fully into your value, grab a free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Woman of Value on my website, thewomanofvalue.com. Just click the link at the top of the homepage. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to click the subscribe button in your listening app. And if there's something in this episode that inspired you, please share it with others, because the more we share these inspirational stories, the more women of value we will have in this world. I'll see you next time.